There are moments when people look at you and assume you understand nothing at all. They see your silence and rush to conclude that you are weak, naive, or not sharp enough to recognize what is truly happening around you. But what they do not know is that behind that quiet exterior is a mind that never closes its eyes, a mind that observes, takes note, and quietly gathers every subtle sign, from the slight furrow of a brow, a broken sentence, to the strange pauses in the way they treat you. And then, within the very silence they so easily dismiss, you begin to discover your own strength, the strength of not reacting impulsively, of staying calm when challenged, and of letting time rather than your voice reveal the truth. Because as we grow older, we begin to realize that not every battle requires shouting, and not every accusation deserves a response. Sometimes, calmness becomes the most effective form of self-protection. Sometimes, silence itself forces those who believe they are manipulating us to reveal who they truly are. From the outside, you may look like the weaker one, but inside, you are anything but. You are clear-headed, far more intentional than they imagine. You are turning their carelessness into your advantage, using their arrogance as a mirror reflecting back their own true nature. And eventually, a day comes when they finally understand. The person they believed was oblivious had been seeing everything all along. In that very moment, the entire game shifts. In today's video, we will walk together through that journey, the journey in which silence, observation, and composure become the sharpest tools that help you rise above the narcissist. And from that very moment when the game begins to shift, we step into the heart of the journey, the power of observing in silence. Because, as you will see, the truth often does not need to be chased if you are calm enough to stay still. It will eventually come toward you on its own. While most people rush to react, scramble to defend themselves, or jump into arguments to prove they are right, you chose a completely different path. You paused, you breathed, you observed, you allowed silence to guide you. On the surface, it may seem as though you surrendered, but in reality, that is the moment you stepped into the position of someone who sees farther, deeper, someone gathering far more information than any heated debate could ever reveal. You watched them speak, you allowed them to perform. And interestingly, the more they believed you weren't paying attention, the more they revealed. The sarcastic remarks they considered harmless jokes became the first pieces of the puzzle. The manipulative gestures wrapped in politeness exposed subtle threads of selfishness. Each tiny jab habitual to them quietly mapped out who truly held the advantage. In their eyes, you were small, naive, easy to lead. Your calmness became a warm blanket soothing their fragile ego, convincing them they were the ones in control. But it is precisely in their overconfidence that the mask begins to slip. The shadows they carefully hid, the parts they would never reveal to someone they feared, now appeared openly before you, simply because they assumed you were not a threat. What they called your innocence was actually your depth of vision. You did not argue, interrupt, or rush to correct them. You listened deeply, and your absence of reaction activated their natural inclination to expose themselves. Then comes the moment when the curtain finally falls. The person they believed was a harmless pawn turns out to be the one holding the light over the entire board. You were not powerless, you were intentional. You were not slow, you were patient. And all that time, they had no idea that they were the ones digging the very pit they would later fall into. And from that very observation, another truth begins to unfold. Sometimes you do not need to defeat anyone at all, because they will eventually defeat themselves. When the narcissist finally realizes that you were never as blind as they assumed, that realization cuts through their fragile ego like a hot blade. It hurts not because you did anything to harm them, but because it shatters the narrative they had been using to comfort themselves. Every smirk of superiority, every moment they believed they were winning, suddenly collapses into nothing more than the moves of a pawn being guided by a silent strategist. You were never the one chasing them. You were the one setting the rhythm. You were the one seeing the entire board while they were too busy admiring the one piece they thought made them powerful. And by the time they realize that you are not the one being cornered but the one quietly delivering the checkmate, it is already too late. They were never prepared for that moment, simply because they had grown far too comfortable believing you were weak, unaware, or easily fooled. Yet your victory was never in the noise. It was always in the stillness that allowed them to let their guard down. No audience, no applause, no witnesses to their collapse except themselves. And that is exactly what makes it hurt the most. For when every illusion falls apart, they are left alone with a whirlwind of thoughts. They begin replaying every detail, the comments they thought were harmless, the smirks they assumed you missed, the moments they believed you understood nothing. And then the truth hits them. Every step they took was a trap of their own making. You did not need to humiliate them. You did not need to prove anything. You did not need an apology. All it takes is hearing the shift in their voice when they speak to you now, seeing the way they avoid your eyes, noticing the hesitation before they answer each one an unspoken confession. That is your victory. A victory that requires no shouting, yet leaves a mark they will never forget. And as the quiet shift in the game begins to take form, you come to understand something that very few people realize soon enough. Not every battle can be won with words or force. Some battles can only be won through patience, a weapon the narcissist never anticipates. From the very beginning, you knew that if you tried to argue, confront, or reclaim control, all you would do is push them deeper into defensiveness, prompting them to hide better, manipulate harder, and lash out stronger. But when you allowed them to believe they were leading, that they were the ones holding the reins, they unknowingly revealed their truest selves, piece by piece. Your silence was never surrender. It was a deliberate choice. It was not empty. It was filled with observation, discernment, and reflection. It was wisdom clothed in humility so subtle that the narcissist never suspected it. While they imagined themselves directing the entire script, they were, in truth, acting out a familiar play without understanding its ending. And you, with clarity and steadiness, became the invisible hand guiding them toward the very corners they chose for themselves. You were always several steps ahead. Not because you were manipulative, but because you saw more clearly. You listened not only to what they said, but to everything they tried so hard to hide beneath their theatrics. You noticed the details they believed were insignificant. Every exaggerated story, every inflated accomplishment, every moment they tried to prove their superiority, each became a clue revealing more about them than they intended. And then comes the moment of realization, the moment they finally understand that what they once dismissed in you, your silence, your calmness, your lack of reactive behavior, was never weakness. It was the strategy that caused them to lose control. That realization hits them like a direct strike to an already fragile ego. It exposes the truth. You were never too weak to react. You were too wise to waste your energy fighting battles that had no value. From that moment on, something begins to grow quietly inside them. Fear. A silent fear that they made an irreversible mistake. A fear that they underestimated the wrong person. And deeper still, a fear that if they continue to dismiss you, they will have to pay the price again. When you choose silence, people often mistake it for weakness. But the truth is the opposite. Silence is one of the most formidable forms of strength, a shield that guards you from meaningless blows and, at the same time, a sharp sword that allows truth to carve its own path. In that quiet space others assume is empty, you are observing not just with your eyes, but with intuition, with the sensitivity of someone who has learned to read between the lines. While the narcissist is busy sharpening words, rehearsing tactics, and arranging expressions for maximum effect, you are quietly recording reality with precision and care. They think you are harmless because you do not react. But not reacting does not mean not seeing. Your silence is not a sign of confusion, it is a sign of discernment, a recognition that not everything deserves your energy or your voice. Every moment you restrain yourself, every time you refuse to step into their trap of provocation, you open another doorway for them to reveal who they truly are. Arrogance blinds its bearer. When someone believes they are untouchable, They grow careless. When they think they are the smartest in the room, they talk too much. And when they assume you are no threat, the darkest parts of them slip out unfiltered. You step back not to surrender, but to see the whole picture. From that vantage point, you notice the contradictions hiding in their narrative, the unnatural pauses, the subtle movements that betray the very deception they think they've concealed. What they work hardest to hide becomes most visible at the moment they feel safest. And you understand, better than anyone, that speaking too soon is giving away your power. A rushed reaction becomes a shield for them to hide behind. So you wait. You allow them the time and space to paint their entire portrait, to reveal themselves with strokes they assume are invisible. By the time everything becomes clear, you no longer need to strike a single blow. The truth has already done it for you. The most subtle part of this entire journey lies here. You never had to prove that you were fighting. In fact, your strength came from letting them believe that no battle existed at all. When you stopped counterattacking, stopped explaining, and refused to engage in meaningless arguments, the narcissist began to relax. They let go of their performance. They stopped controlling every detail of their image. And in that exact moment, the facade they had worked so hard to maintain started to crack, revealing the raw ego they once hid as if it were a sacred secret. At first, they paid no attention to your silence. But silence has a durability no spoken word can match. When you remained steady, unshaken, unprovoked, unwilling to be pulled into the emotional storm they created, they slowly began to feel an unfamiliar discomfort. A small question arose within them, delicate but destabilizing. What if this silence isn't weakness, but strength? And once that thought takes root, their entire inner world begins to tremble. Narcissists do not fear confrontation, they are used to it. What terrifies them is the unpredictable, the unreadable, the unreactive. If you had exposed them too early, they would have instantly rebuilt their mask, shifted strategies, and hidden themselves deeper. But because they were convinced you saw nothing, they grew careless. They talked too much. They acted impulsively. They allowed the selfish core they once protected to spill out openly. And what did you do? You simply stood there calm, steady like a neutral recorder, watching them write their own confession line by line. Most people cannot tolerate being underestimated. They rush to prove themselves. But you are different. You understand that being underestimated can sometimes be a gift, a blade sharper than any sword. When they assume you are harmless, they loosen their guard. And in that blind confidence, every careless word, every inflated gesture becomes another stone in the monument of their eventual downfall. In the end, they did not lose because you struck them. They lost because they believed you didn't know how to strike at all. And then, at a certain point, you realize you never needed to rip off the mask they tried so desperately to hold in place. You didn't need to expose them, didn't need to dissect right and wrong, didn't need to stage a dramatic unveiling of who they truly are. All you ever had to do was let them live long enough in the illusion they built, and truth would take care of the rest, stepping into the light with far more force and clarity than any accusation could. Their arrogance, ironically, grants you the very power they believed belonged only to them. The power to see the full picture, to connect every fragment, to understand them more deeply than they understand themselves. Your silence was never helplessness, it was intention. Your patience was never passivity, it was wisdom choosing the right moment. And your humility was never foolishness, it was the protective armor of a sharp and discerning mind. You become the architect of the stage, the one on which the narcissist steps forward, performs, and without realizing it, reveals everything they hope to hide. Patience for you is not idleness, it is sacred ground, where strength takes root quietly with every moment you choose not to react. During that waiting, you are not standing still, you are working within, reading pauses, detecting shifts in tone, observing the small cracks in their performative confidence. You become a scientist of the soul, analyzing each detail, each unconscious signal they let slip. What they believed no one could see, you already saw. What they tried to bury, you had already stored away. You understand that the brief satisfaction of an angry outburst can never compare to the weight of a response delivered at exactly the right moment. Timing is everything. Speak too early, and truth gets buried in noise. But when the evidence is undeniable, when the ground has tilted fully in your favor, your words will land like thunder, impossible to ignore. Every moment you restrain yourself, every time you refuse to explode, you are strengthening the skill of self-mastery, a type of power the narcissist, with their reactive and impulsive ego, will never be able to touch. And it is precisely this mastery that makes them fear you the most. And then comes the moment when the narcissist finally realizes that none of their familiar tactics can make you explode, lose control, or feed their chaos. One of their sharpest weapons falls useless to the ground. The instant they understand that you are not just refusing to play their game, but are operating on an entirely different level, steadier, clearer, and far beyond their reach, power begins to shift. Every time you refuse to react the way they expect, you quietly tilt the scale in your favor. Because time has always stood with truth. Lies that once seemed smooth begin to contradict themselves. Stories they crafted so carefully start to unravel. The polished mask they wore with pride begins to crack in places they never anticipated. And you do not need to intervene. You only need to let time speak for you. Had you broken the silence too soon, you would have given them space to repair, to disguise, to craft a new facade. But because you remained patient, because you never let their chaos dictate your rhythm, they kept talking, kept performing, kept believing you were blind. And that blind overconfidence pulled them deeper into the trap they set for themselves. They looked at your calmness and mistook it for surrender. They had no idea it was simply the stillness before the storm, the quiet inhale before the entire truth comes into view. And when the truth finally steps into the light, you do not need to shout, argue, or prove anything. Every word they have spoken, every action they have taken, each becomes evidence standing firmly on your side. You did not just win. You revealed that truth never needed your protection. It protects itself with a force no argument can match. What wounds them most is not your accusation. It is the moment they realize it themselves. And lessons that rise from within the ego become scars deep, private, unforgettable. As for you, you never wasted yourself in circular battles. You preserved your strength. You held on to your peace. And you let their own illusions collapse under the undeniable weight of truth. And perhaps, from the very moment they stepped deeper into the trap they had woven for themselves, something else quietly began to take shape. Your silence started speaking on your behalf. As the final waves of chaos faded, you found yourself still standing steady as an anchor in a turbulent sea, unmoved by the storm that had raged around you. Meanwhile, the narcissist staggered in the aftershocks of a truth they could no longer hide, deny, or twist. A truth that needed no announcement from you, because it revealed itself as naturally as the first light of dawn. The message reminds you, do not expect a confession. Pride builds walls far too high for that. They may never utter an apology, but you will see it in their eyes, in the hesitation, right before they speak, in the newfound caution threaded through their voice. The topics they once flaunted so confidently will quietly disappear, because now they know you can see through the costume they once believed was flawless. And for you, an apology is no longer necessary. Their change in behavior is the clearest testimony you could ask for, living with the truth that the person they once underestimated turned out to be the one who understood everything, that alone is a punishment sharper than any rebuke. Words fade, but a realization that has rooted itself in the soul becomes a weight they must carry like a shadow that never leaves. The message ends with a wisdom both simple and profound. The greatest victories require no stage, no spotlight, no applause. Playing the fool was never weakness. It was strategy, your way of protecting your peace, preserving your energy, and maintaining control of the entire game without ever needing direct confrontation. True strength does not reside in noise, for noise inevitably dissolves into silence. Strength lies in calmness, in discipline, in precision, leaving a mark that cannot be erased. You have become someone whose power is felt in your quiet, unwavering presence, someone who cannot be manipulated or shaken. And in the end, dignity, clarity, and peace are not merely life strategies, they are forms of victory no one will ever be able to take from you.